Good morning, all. And today's video is to give a little bit of background as to why autistic adults living in the United States are having so many problems anytime we have to go into any kind of a court trial or hearing scenario or hire a lawyer to represent us. And even though I know from the number of viewers I'm getting on my Neurotranslator videos and how courts have misinterpreted my autistic language, that many autistic people do not believe that that is something that might impact their life in a very damaging and negative way. Because you cannot be an autistic adult, particularly a late diagnosed one, living in the United States and not have to go cup in hand to the Social Security Administration to ask to get your adult supports and financial services. And in the face of an 86% national unemployment rate, many more than you think actually are going to find themselves having to do this. Because there is an 86% national unemployment rate. So if you are an autistic adult, you could be living with your parents who still support you. You could be doing that up to the age of 38 or older. I was 38 years old, and my mother was still supporting me, and she was living with me, and she was my caretaker. So we know that that's one way that you might get your needs met if you are an autistic adult. There's approximately 14% of autistic adults are making enough income from working to support themselves, but they are not the majority. So you can't just live by breathing air or drinking water. And even in some places for homeless populations, such as St. Petersburg, Florida, you cannot find free water to drink. You have to pay for a glass of water. And if you don't have a job and no income and no money, and you're not getting adult autism financial supports and services, well, good luck even coming up with a spare change to pay for a glass of water. So I know that the situation is much more dire in this country for autistic adults than people want to admit. Well, how do I know this? Because of my autistic lived experience. And so autistic adults are going to have to go into court trials or hearings. Autistic adults could just happen to cross paths by happenstance with a police officer with no autism training, like the caregiver of the autistic adult in Miami, Florida, where the police officers who lacked autism training shot the caregiver. And that was the impetus in Florida for passing a statute under Florida law that requires mandatory autism spectrum training for all law enforcement officers in Florida. So there's this tension that still exists, but there's big problems. Because first of all, I have received comments about why should autistic adults care about what courts do, or about it being sucked into a court or a hearing. Why should they care? Most autistic adults know they can't be lawyers, so they don't try. Well, why does it matter? Well, here's why it matters. If you are going to try to train your special interest talents into income-producing work as an autistic adult or a parent of an autistic child turning adult, or if you were going to try to say, well, what kinds of work can an autistic person do? What suits and fits an autistic person? Well, yeah, there's lots of lines of work and lots of lines of business that maybe if an autistic person from childhood to adulthood were with a whole village of people and a lot of money trained to do that job, then maybe they could do that. Well, I wasn't trained to do all those jobs, and I don't have the adaptability to do those jobs. And I have an extreme need for sameness, and I can't do anything that I wasn't specifically trained to do and do it in the way I was trained to do it. So in other words, even though I was trained to be a lawyer by going to law school and graduating law school and passing the California bar exam, I am not trained to be a paralegal. I am not trained to be a legal secretary. I am not trained to be a legal assistant. I don't have that training, and I can't adapt to that type of role from the specific training of what I was trained to do and how I was trained to do it, which is to be a lawyer. But I'm not allowed to be a lawyer because there is just almost 100% prejudice and bias against autistic people by the legal profession, by the state bars, by other lawyers. It's what I call a cult-like education. And so I want to discuss why that is. But first, I want to say that autistic people should be allowed to become lawyers, at least in the percentage that they are in the regular population in the United States and in the States. Why? Because when you have a public monopoly like lawyers are the ones who have the keys to access to the courts and to a favorable remedy. Lawyers are the ones that have the key to become judges under the eligibility criteria. Lawyers are the ones that have the key to unlock the door to be a congressional representative, a governor, a president, positions that should include autistic people. As ASAN says, nothing about us without us. But that's not the reality in the United States. The reality in the United States is that we have almost a 100% homogeneous, neurotypical, dominant population that occupy almost 100% of our congressional and at the state level legislative positions, occupy governorships and presidencies, occupy almost 100% of the judgeships at state and federal levels, and occupy almost 100% of bar membership in every state bar in every state in the United States. In other words, autistic people, the autistic population does not have a voice in our own governance, in our own fates, in our own welfare and well-being. At the same time that we do have some expertise, some special interests, some skills in a narrow set that are superior to neurotypicals, what we commonly call the autistic superpower. And we know that, but we are still, as an autistic population in the United States, being denied the right to have a voice in our own political governments. And so that is not okay. It's not like when you're trained to do a particular job, well, if one business won't hire you, you can go to another business, okay? If, say, IBM won't hire you because you're autistic, then go to Microsoft, where there's lots of autistic people who have been hired. Well, you don't have that choice in the political system, the court systems, the Congress, the legislatures, the governorships, and the presidencies in the United States. And so the autistic population is a population who doesn't have any political power in this country for the most part. It's part of the outrage that's coming forth from the Democrats against Elon Musk, because he's probably one of the first autistic people who have ever been given a key role in government under Doge to find where did all the money go, because he's a computer geek and he's very good at it. And he certainly is a genius at parallel parking rockets. We all know that. But for most of the rest of us, autistic adults, the autistic population, autistic parents, we don't have a political voice. We completely lack political power, any voice in the outcomes of our lives. And so I went to law school. I was never told or warned or disclosed to me by anyone about how prejudiced and biased the legal profession at all levels is against autistic people. But boy, when you enter your 1L law school year, you start to experience it. You start to see it firsthand. And this permeates and percolates upward throughout the entirety of the legal profession. Why is that? How did this happen? The unfortunate history of how the autistic people became excluded from the legal profession and where it is today and why this is wrong. So, first of all, I want to start with what happened with the so-called overhaul of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure in 1938. And the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure are the rules that govern how you bring a case in federal courts. And up until that time, there were all sorts of autistic people who became lawyers by mentoring with a bar member, who may have been involved in our government, even founding fathers, who are, by hindsight, known to be autistic. And so autistic people were integrated with neurotypical majority population up until about 1938. So what happened in 1938? Well, this law review here, Oklahoma Law Review, 2008, The Revolution of 1938 and Its Discontents by Perschbacher and Bassett here, tells the story. They talk about how and why the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure were overhauled completely in 1938. They call it a revolution. It had a Thermidorian reaction. Note 1, they define a Thermidorian reaction as exemplified by the French Revolution, refers to a replacement of revolutionary aims and leadership by more conservative influences, sometimes including even a partial return to pre-revolutionary values. This revolution in the federal courts with the overhaul of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 1938 was a seizure of the court system by the neurotypical majority. They wanted to put the autistic people who had become lawyers out of the court system. So 1938 was the perfect time for much needed reform. And then here they're talking about the encyclopedic knowledge and detail-oriented knowledge and focus of the autistic population and autistic lawyers. 1938 was the perfect time for much-needed reform, a time to shift away from arcane and clumsy pleading rules that trapped the unwary, the neurotypical majority, and enriched the few who had encyclopedic knowledge of code pleading, to institute a new vision of procedure employing much simplified pleading rules that emphasize fact development and sought to resolve cases on the merits. And that is at page 276 of this law review. Now, what was the social movement underlying this overhaul of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure in 1938? The so-called revolution, where the autistic lawyers were thrown out and the neurotypical dominant majority seized control of the courts. Well, eugenics, the eugenics movement in the United States. the set of beliefs and practices which aims to improve the genetic quality of the human population. It played a significant role in the history and culture of the United States from the late 19th century into the mid-20th century. The cause became increasingly promoted by intellectuals of the progressive era. Well, its American practice was ostensibly about improving genetic quality. It has been argued eugenics was more about preserving the position of the dominant groups in the population. Scholarly research has determined that people who found themselves targets of the eugenics movement were those who were seen as unfit for society, the poor, the disabled, the mentally ill, and specific communities of color. In the Deep South, women's associations played an important role in rallying support for eugenic legal reform. Efforts began to shape American families, which included anti-miscegenation law, unfit versus fit individuals, and concerns over hereditary genes. This eugenics movement in the United States also became embedded in almost all the state's bar associations and bar admission committees and bar examiners. And when I was born in April of 1956, this country was in the middle of the eugenics movement. And so today, from a position of hindsight looking back, I get judges or Social Security ALJs who are maybe 30 years younger than I am. And they say, well, why don't you have doctor documentation that you had an autism diagnosis at the right time when you were between 1 and 3 years old? And where's your medical records? And now, well, we don't know what an autism diagnosis looks like. We just think it's some office medical notes, even though your doctor used the ADIR, gold standard autism diagnostic test, and in his own words called it an, quote, autism diagnosis. And so during this time I was growing up, one of the things about the culture of parents of people who are my age, autistic people, is that our parents and grandparents lived in a culture where nobody went to doctors. It didn't matter how sick you got or what kind of injury you got. My parents and grandparents and the parents and grandparents of most of the people that I know born in my era did not go to doctors. Why? Because they didn't want to get hung up in this eugenics movement on the wrong end of it. And so you say, well, now, but we're living in the more modern age. Well, that's not entirely true. And certainly the United States Supreme Court case, Tennessee v. Lane, 541 U.S. 509, 2004, goes through a detailed history of what was happening. I graduated from high school in June of 1973. And it was not until 1973 that the issue of sterilization abuse under the eugenics movement in the United States was brought to media attention. There were no new guidelines about this until 1979, some 6 years after I graduated from high school. In California, this continued until around 1980. And all this can be found in this article, Eugenics in the United States, on Wikipedia. I moved to California during the summer of 1979. So I was still caught in this milieu of this eugenics movement. And our parents back then did not go to doctors. It would ruin their careers, their professional careers. they could have their child taken away and institutionalized and sterilized. Everybody had to be a cookie cutter type person. That's why they came up with neurotypical standards and social norms. They all grow out of the eugenics movement, that everyone has to be alike and fit in. And it's the eugenics movement, therefore, that is the impetus for all this forcing autistic females to mask to fit in and not to be different. And why, when we were different, we were told we were broken and bad. And this eugenics movement infected all the state's bar admissions committees. For example, you may think that being a black person and wanting to be admitted to what was then an almost 100% homogeneously white state bar, like the Florida bar, was part of the eugenics movement. Well, it was. It wasn't just a race-based problem. It was a disability eugenics classification, because during the eugenics movement, they invented a psychiatric illness called drapetomania, which was the inability to turn white. And they sucked African Americans into that psychiatric label as a reason to exclude them from bar admission. And that is addressed at length in a Florida coastal law review called Anatomy of a Bar Admission about Virgil Hawkins that anyone can read. Well, it wasn't just black people who bar examiners were targeting. This is why bar exams were invented, because it was admitted during the COVID-19 pandemic by some states, such as California, that the bar exams have been used to exclude minorities. And that's what they were invented for, but they didn't just exclude black people. They excluded women for a long time. They excluded Jews. They excluded Eastern Europeans. The list goes on and on about the unfortunate, prejudiced, and biased history of bar examiners in the United States. And the California Committee of Bar Examiners and the Florida Board of Bar Examiners do not escape this history unscathed, unfortunately. The eugenics movement became even more entrenched in the legal system in the United States. And my husband reminded me of this, because although my law school, the University of San Francisco, never used this example in our law school classes, my husband told me in his law school, St. Thomas University, they did use this example. And this is an example that has been involved in the, what I would like to call a cult-like education of lawyers and judges, which has persisted in the United States. And I know certainly firsthand it has persisted in California and Florida. You have to remember that this was happening in the range of 1930s to 1950s. So one of the teaching tools law schools and bar examiners and lawyer ethics committees and lawyer education has used for far too long to try to teach lawyer ethics, and these are neurotypical dominated ableist lawyer ethics which harm autistic people, is, as this law review article here from the University of Illinois College of Law by Tar, A Different Ethical Issue in Anatomy of a Murder, Friendly Fire, from the Cowboy Hero. This was the year 2007. It's talking about a scene in the 1959 film Anatomy of a Murder, which starred the lawyer hero Paul Beagler, who is played by Jimmy Stewart, who struggles to balance his duty to the court and his duty to his client as he interviews his client for the first time. The scene serves as a useful vehicle for exploring how far a lawyer may go to explain a defense and then ask for the facts without stepping over the line of soliciting perjury on the part of the client witness. That article can be found here. Excerpts from that film are cited by the American Bar Association to teach lawyer ethics. They are cited by many law schools, many continuing legal education courses, and bar examiners and bar associations. And although the scene sparks a discussion of lawyer ethics, the importance of the scene is that in order for Jimmy Stewart's client to claim an insanity defense, which is his only excuse in this scenario to a first-degree murder charge, obviously implicit in it is that the lawyer Jimmy Stewart had to suggest to his client that he see a doctor, because he would have to have a medical workup. Because in the scene, this is the scene from Anatomy of a Murder, 4 Ways to Defend Murder Scene movie clips. And this is available for free on YouTube. And so this is a clip of the scene which I'm discussing.
The facts are true. What you need is a legal peg so that the jury can hang up their sympathy in your behalf. You follow me? Mm-hmm. What's your legal excuse, Lieutenant? What's your legal excuse for killing Barney Quill?
Not justification.
Not justification.
Excuse. Just excuse.
Well, what excuses are there? How should I know? You're the one that plugged Quill.
Well, I must have been mad.
How's that?
I said I must have been mad.
Well, bad temper's no excuse.
Well, I mean, I must have been crazy.
That clip is found on YouTube here. And why is this so important? Because it has been taught since this movie came out in around 1959 by the cult-like legal education system, attorney education, judicial education system, that it's unethical for a lawyer to try to investigate his client's case and so-called border on coaching a witness or suggesting he maybe needs to see a doctor because it might give him a defense. And what does this have to do with autism spectrum disorder? We all know that late diagnosed autistic women, it doesn't matter what our age is over the age of 18, whether we are an autistic woman in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, our 60s, or older, we all have one thing in common. We have grown up knowing we are different. We have been treated as different by others, that we don't fit in, that we have to mask our autism to pass as a neurotypical, because if we don't, we become punished and told we're bad and we're broken. And it takes a huge mental health toll on autistic females for this reason. And so we start to search for answers. And then if we try to go to doctors or psychologists or psychotherapists, and this is particularly true of any autistic female who is going through this journey in their lives throughout the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s. Many of us, probably most of us, have had doctors peek in the room for 2 minutes or for 15 minutes, and their only focus is on snapshots of what they think they see in that very short visit. None of them have taken childhood histories. None of them. And they'll pronounce things like you have anxiety, or you have depression, or you have borderline personality disorder, or you have OCD, or you're bipolar, or you've got some schizoaffective disorder, or any number of things like that. And these are almost all misdiagnoses because they're not taking the childhood history. They are not looking at the whole picture. And this also goes hand in hand with videos you can find on YouTube about these journeys by late diagnosed autistic women that are like mine, that resonate with me, that I relate to, that other autistic women listen to, they relate to, it resonates with them. It's called the journey to getting an autism diagnosis. And in addition to that, diagnosed autistic adults often post videos about the problems with the medical personnel. They'll go to these medical providers, the doctors, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, and they don't know what the female presentation of autism looks like. So women are not getting very good medical care, not accurate, not helpful, and this pervades the medical profession because up until recently, it was only pediatricians who were receiving training in autism spectrum disorders. And even today, many medical providers are not receiving in medical school any type of autism spectrum educational training. They don't know. They can't spot it. So they don't understand it. So there's this problem. And this problem clashes head on with the cult-like legal education of law schools, bar associations, bar examiners, the ABA, American Bar Association, and judicial training itself. And it produces this anatomy of a murder, Jimmy Stewart-esque, this eugenics era viewpoint that if you go to a doctor to find out what's wrong with you, if that could possibly provide a legal defense or a legal claim, you're unethical. And so lawyers should not be referring women with autism on this journey to an adult autism diagnosis, which is really and truly a journey to understand ourselves, understand why we're the way we are, why we've been told we're different and broken our whole lives. It's a journey to find out our authentic selves. And every time we've gotten these diagnoses that were misdiagnoses, and we study them and we look at the criteria and we look at what the doctor says, we're left saying, but that doesn't describe all of my problems. That doesn't describe everything that I am experiencing. Well, of course it doesn't, because they're missing the autism spectrum diagnosis. This clash between the legal profession, eugenics-sourced educational cult-like methods is slamming head-on into the phenomena of late diagnosed autistic women who have been on a journey to find out why we're the way we are, why we have been treated our entire life the way we have, and on the journey to an autism diagnosis. I recently ran across a classic example of what an autistic woman will encounter when she tries to hire a Florida bar member. And it is this cult-like judicial education is slopping over on the attorney's attitude. And this is almost all attorneys, almost all Florida bar members. Certainly the more than 3,000 I've tried to get legal representation from and not been able to as an autistic woman. But the underlying theme is that they don't think autism is real. They don't think it's a real disability. They still think it's maybe a childhood disability and doesn't affect people in adulthood. I'm going to refer to a YouTube short put on by Caitlin Partlow. And I know I've criticized her in the past, but this video is really good. And this video explains what some of the problem is about these attorneys. Cult-like legal education is teaching them that people shouldn't be referred themselves to a doctor to get a medical workup or diagnosis because, heaven forbid, it becomes an issue in a legal proceeding. Oh my God, that would be unethical. Well, but if somebody is an diagnosed autistic woman on a journey to find out about her life in order to support her needs more fully and understand her life and why she is the way she is, that's a pretty sad, pathetic affair to call it unethical. And it's wrong. But Florida bar members and Florida judges, including federal judges, continue to have the attitude that autism is not real. It's not a real disability.
Things that make serious injury, or worse, more likely if you're autistic. Starting with the most obvious thing to cause harm, self-injury, which occurs in 30 to 50% of us. Most commonly, this includes punching yourself in the head, biting or pinching skin, or pulling out your own hair. But in extreme cases, it can also include gouging out your own eyes, biting off your own appendages, ripping out your own teeth, or breaking your own bones. Symptoms can include freezing during actions, getting locked in different postures, increased slowness in movement, loss of language abilities or complete mutism, spontaneous laughing, crying, or screaming, episodes of physical aggression or rage, incontinence, refusal to eat, change clothes, or bathe. So next time you hear someone say, autism is just a difference, you can tell them to cut the shit.
And that video is available here and was put on by Caitlin Partlow. Now, I want to compare Caitlin's video with this classic example of how Florida bar lawyers have actually been educated through their legal education in law schools, the Florida bar continuing legal education, and other legal education to take the position that they don't think autism is really real. And they think that if you as an autistic person tell a court you have an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, especially if you're asking for reasonable accommodations, and heaven forbid you try to ask for those special accommodations on a bar exam, that your autism isn't really real. This is a clip from Florida bar member, a Social Security attorney, Walter Hanat, who has a channel on YouTube.
I'm going to be very straightforward with you, and some of you are going to be mean towards me about it, but autism is used as a study aid crutch for a lot of kids. Some truly have autism that limit them. And we give them the benefit to have, additional study time, notes for their exams, etc. As we should. Some people don't have autism, and they use it essentially as a crutch to gain an advantage for studying. It's similar in idea to people taking certain types of study drugs. When I went to law school, I didn't take study drugs. I saw a lot of my friends and fellow classmates taking study drugs. It was an advantage that they had when it came to mass studying, mass memorization, to basically achieve a better score.
Now, this video is here on YouTube, and this is Walter Hanat And when he says some of you are going to be mean to me, well, that's probably referring to some comments that he made to me after I made some comments on one of his other videos. So maybe it wasn't aimed at me. Maybe he gets lots of autistic people criticizing him. But you can notice from this video, he's referring to autistic children, but his meaning extends to autistic adults because he's talking about his law school exams. You can see the attitude that he doesn't really think autism is real for most people, including people who have an autism diagnosis. And this is a classic example of the screw-off attitude of the neurotypical members of the Florida Bar that they've received from their law school educations, the Florida Bar's continuing legal education, and you see it in judges as well, because when you give a judge in Florida or a state or federal court in Florida your autism diagnosis, they just ignore it, and then they punish you anyway. They allow opposing attorneys to file motions to strike your autism diagnosis as irrelevant, immaterial, impertinent matter, sometimes scandalous matter. Yeah, having an autism diagnosis, oh yeah, that's a scandalous matter. Oh boy. That is the attitude. And that is what you come up against when you go into any Florida court, when you try to hire a Florida bar member. Say a Florida judge tells you you have to hire a bar member, or a federal court tells you that. You can't hire bar members. They don't have mandatory autism spectrum disorder educational training. They don't, deep inside, in their heart of hearts, believe that autism is real. They don't believe it's a real disability. Well, I can tell you another way in which I have been harmed by this, so I can add to Caitlin Partlow's video. I did one of my first of several videos posted yesterday, which maybe it's boring to some, but what the boring part of it should tell you the intensity of my special interest in horses. And that was one of my childhood autistic traits that I've had lifelong, is an intense special interest in horses. So intense, it's not at all like the normal neurotypical's interest in horses. It goes so deeper, so much more above and beyond. For example, in fourth grade, my fourth grade teacher said that I'm not going to let you pick any type of topics to write about this time. I'm going to pick it for you because you always write about horses, and I'm going to make sure you can't write about horses. So the topic you're getting is the Parthenon. Oh, there's no horses involved with the Parthenon? Well, there are horses around the top of the fresco around the Parthenon, and that's what I wrote about, because my special interest is and always has been horses. So now let's fast forward, since I've been posting these videos about Social Security ALJ Kelly Fitzgerald. She rejected my autism diagnosis by Dr. Michael Hoffman, MD, as just some office notes, by disregarding the fact Dr. Hoffman gave me an ADIR gold standard autism test as the basis for his diagnosis of me, and in his own words called it an, quote, autism diagnosis, end quote. Well, you could be maybe an English major, political sci major, go to law school and be neurotypical, become a Social Security ALJ. That doesn't mean you get to say a licensed medical doctor's autism spectrum disorder diagnosis based on a valid gold standard autism diagnostic test and called in the doctor's own words and, quote, autism diagnosis isn't what the doctor said it is. You can't do that. You are not a doctor when you're the English political sci major neurotypical ALJ. But this ALJ went one further. which is totally irrational, arbitrary, capricious, and blows your mind. Dr. Hoffman also wrote in some of his medical reports that I had several brain injuries over my lifetime, some of them significant. He took a medical history of my brain injuries, and then you have this ALJ Fitzgerald just trying to make false accusations on me that I've got all sorts of income that might be unreported, but she doesn't really know because she doesn't really have any proof, from so-called allegedly riding and jumping horses every day and training horses and breeding horses and ponies. Okay, so if you're going to say that as an ALJ, then you must know that horseback riding and horse riding and jumping, it's inherently dangerous, and it's one of the most injury-causing things you can do in life. It's right up there with parachuting out of airplanes or test piloting aircraft. And that it's very common and widespread that anyone who learns to ride a horse, and particularly learns to ride a horse to a very high level like I did, is going to fall off horses, be bucked off horses, be run under objects, have horses rear and flip over backwards on you, have horses kick towards your head, and that horses can slip and lose their footing and fall on you, and that just the fact that somebody is riding and jumping horses at any point in their life puts you on notice they probably have multiple brain injuries. And this lady said, this ALJ, absurdly and ridiculously said, I can't find any evidence of a brain injury. Oh, really? Really? And what planet do you live on? Well, to extend what Caitlin Partlow said about why autism is a disability, it's absolutely widely known to anybody who's living in the world today, which should include this ALJ, that autistic people have special interests. We have special interests. My special interest is horses. I started riding at around age 10, but I was obsessed with horses since about age 2 when I first rode a rocking horse. And by age 6.5, where I was asking, I have a horse, I was getting plastic horses, and magazine pictures of horses, and horses, and everything was horses, and everything in my life was horses. And this continued through my adolescence, it continued in high school, and it continues to this day. So this ALJ knew that if my special interest was horses, and with common knowledge of the risk of riding and jumping horses, that if you reached a high professional level, you likely have maybe 20, 30 brain injuries in your lifetime, not, I can't find any evidence of a brain injury. So to add to Caitlin Partlow's great little YouTube video of how autism can be a disability, well, autistic person's special interests may cause a disability. So autism is both a difference and a disability. And autism is real. Autism is real. And this attitude of these Florida bar members, this legal educational training that is still grounded in the eugenics movement. They still don't give autistic people the reasonable accommodations we need in the court systems or in administrative law judge hearings. They ignore us. They ignore the autism diagnosis when you hand it to them. They still pronounce you to be bad and broken. It's just a never-ending dribble across time. The same bad broken dribble, bad broken dribble, bad broken dribble, bad broken dribble coming from these judges and lawyers. And the lawyers won't represent you because they're still getting this anatomy of a murder, Jimmy Stewart. It's unethical for a lawyer to investigate if a person has a disability. And then, of course, implicitly stated in the movie to refer him to medical providers who can document that disability. Well, that outdated. Law school education, lawyer education, and judicial education is outdated. It clashes head on with the autism spectrum, late diagnosed females with autism, and our lifetime journeys to find out that we are autistic and not bad or broken. And so I just wanted to do this video because you have to understand the history for these misinterpretation neurotranslator court videos I'm putting out and other misinterpretations and misunderstanding videos I'm putting out that are analyzed by ChatGPT 4.5. You have to understand the historical background of why this is an issue, why this situation exists. Why on earth would a late diagnosed autistic female want to be a lawyer? Why would she go to law school to be a lawyer? Well, when I went to law school, I didn't really know I was autistic. So it's like the rest of my life where my parents had a childhood autism diagnosis, but they hid it from me. So I didn't receive all the benefit that is discussed in videos like this one here. This is an excellent video, and that's on YouTube. So I grew up not understanding why I was different, why I couldn't make friends, why no one liked me, why everyone told me I was bad and broken, why I couldn't do certain things to fit in and do what is needed to meet or comply with neurotypical expectations and standards. So you get this story from your parents when you do not know you are autistic as a child, this story that you graduate high school and go to college and get married and have children and the whole neurotypical scenario. And I was fed that story. And that story, it didn't work for me being autistic in my life. So following that neurotypical narrative, I went to college. I went to law school. It wasn't until after law school that I learned I was autistic and had a childhood autism diagnosis, and that I sought out another late autism diagnosis from my doctor, Michael Hoffman. So this is the background. This is the clash that's happening between lawyers, judges, court systems, the legal profession, the journey of late diagnosed autistic women, this journey we're on to get an autism diagnosis, and why it's a head-on clash, and why that creates so many problems. I'm just saying why it creates problems for autistic adults. And I'm publishing this video to bring more awareness and appreciation of autistic people trying to live in a neurotypical world and the plight that we face trying to live in this neurotypical world, and hope to bring more appreciation and understanding to autistic adults. So, if you like my video, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, and you'll be notified of my future videos. Thank you for watching.